And so then I ended up selling a website to my former landlord who had this terrible website. And I basically was able to sell this website in a single phone call. And I was like, whoa, that was amazing. And so then I just decided to start selling a bunch of landlord websites because that one was so easy. And then I eventually changed the name of my company to Rentlinx, RENTLINX, and made it basically a rental housing advertising service. So basically landlords have a choice of posting on like 50 different websites to advertise their rental properties, like Zillow or Craigslist or apartments.com or rentals.com or apartment guide. There's like 50 of these sites. And so I made a website where landlords could post once and automatically advertise on all those different sites and have like their leads come back to them. So yeah, it was a path of many years. I didn't have like this, like, I wouldn't wake up one day inspired by the dramatic need of rental housing advertising syndication. I just kind of like found some customers, saw a pain point in their lives, and then over the course of years, in my case, ended up building a product to match that. But I was young and didn't know what I was doing. I hope if I I actually am starting another company right now. I hope I'll do better this time, finding that product market fit sooner. But that's what I did last time.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a really great idea, especially for people who are listening who want to come up with an idea right now. I feel like your idea can reciprocate in other ways, in different forms in today's modern world. But it seems like there was a lot of ups and downs in your entrepreneurial endeavor. So what's the biggest obstacle you faced when you had your business?
That's a good question. There's like some dead air right here. The biggest obstacle. I think the early days were tough because I didn't know what I was doing, and I didn't really know how to get the first client. Why on earth would anyone pay money to like a 22-year-old who had no idea what he was doing, who had never sold something before? And so like just getting that very first bit of traction was tough. And then pivoting the business. And so for, a few years, we were trying to sell this like website tool, where it's basically like a website for landlords. And it was really hard to sell, and it was really slow to sell. And, when I finally like had the courage to basically pivot the business and say, hey, let's sell a whole different product to the same customers, but sell a different product. The business started like taking off, growth increased much more quickly. Yeah, I don't know. I guess I'm not sure either of those were super big challenges. Maybe I'm like remembering with rose-colored lenses. It was kind of a long time ago. Like I started the business at 21 or 22. Now I'm 40. And so now I'm just remembering, yeah, it turned out to work out, but like there's a lot of dark days where like I didn't know if it was going to work, right? And yeah, I like didn't have health insurance for like 2 or 3 years, and I was like, man, if I can't get health insurance, like I was an idiot 23-year-old. So I know you guys are like teenagers, so you think 23 probably sounds pretty old, but from 40-year-old perspective, like 23-year-olds have no idea what they're doing. And so I was an 23-year-old who probably like should have had health insurance. But yeah, there's some dark days where I didn't know if it was going to work, and I was, and like my backup plan was to go get a job. I might have been able to call Microsoft and been like, hey, remember 2 years ago when you offered me a job? Like, is that still on the table? Maybe they would have said yes. I don't know, or found some other job. I don't know. But yeah, I think just the persistence, like the day in, day out with no, and oftentimes entrepreneurship is like a total emotional roller coaster. Like you get one phone call and someone who's interested, you're like, oh my gosh, like I'm gonna make a sale. If I make one sale a week, you multiply 52 sales a year, or 52 sales a year, and you're like, oh, I'm gonna be rich. And then like 2 weeks go by and like don't get any phone calls, don't get any emails. You're like, oh my God, this thing's stupid. Like no one's ever gonna buy this. And like pushing through those dark days where you think it's gonna fail. Yeah, that probably was my biggest challenge. That's my answer.
Yeah, that's a great kind of eye-opening statement, because a lot of people don't really know the challenges, especially with entrepreneurship, because most people, they look at the result. They don't necessarily see the journey as to what happened towards getting that end goal. So I kind of had another question along those lines. When you worked on your business and you probably spent a lot of time, how was your lifestyle then in terms of do you just only work on your business and didn't have too much time to do other things? How were your personal finances managed? Like, how was your lifestyle overall?
That's a good question. I think that's a good point about like people seeing the end result and not always looking at the struggle. I think, you know, you look at an NBA player, for example, and you're like, oh man, wouldn't that be nice to be like so tall and so successful? But I'm like, those NBA players work their asses off like every day, and like they're in empty gyms with no spectators. They're in empty like weight rooms. They're like doing like burpees and hill repeats and taking thousands of shots and like, you know, just grind for decades. You know, these NBA players who, you know, get in the NBA in their 20s have probably been doing it for 10 years, have been like working their butts off, you know, like middle school, high school, like, you know, and it's all, and what makes someone successful isn't like the day they like, you know, hit a buzzer beater and in the NBA, it's like the 10 years of grind that went into it. And the same is true for businesses, right? Like one of my favorite sayings is overnight success takes about a decade, because you see these, you know, businesses that are like, oh man, they just got $5 million of funding, or they just got acquired or went public or whatever this like measure of success is. But like, there's like this long grind that happens before that. And so, yeah, my, not that my life is all like glamorous now, but it definitely wasn't glamorous back then. It was, you know, I was initially working out of my living room, like I had a 1-bedroom apartment, tiny, like part of a duplex. And I was working in my living room, living on credit cards, you know, eating the cheapest food I could from Meyer. I was living in Michigan. You know, eventually I got a 2-bedroom and had an office in the 2-bedroom. That was okay. Then eventually we did get an office, and it was like the tiniest little office. Like, you know, I think we were paying like $250 or $300 a month, just like a hole in the wall, like 10 foot by 10 foot. You could put like shove 2 desks against the wall, and like we got internet connection. This was like 3 years in now, still like very, you know, very low, like quality stuff or whatever. My max salary ever when I was like CEO of my company was $36,000 a year. That would be like my take home salary. I literally never took home more than that. I was driving a 99 Ford Explorer the day I sold the company. I was living with roommates. You know, it was, I was scraping by just to like throw everything into the company. And so I think, you know, and I think that's important. You know, a lot of people who want to start companies are attracted to this, like, oh, I'm gonna be like inking deals, I'm gonna be like wheeling and dealing and like big money. I'm like, there's a grind there. And I think, you know, the other successful entrepreneurs I talk to, like, are in it for the grind. And sometimes when I talk to someone who comes with an app idea, like, oh, I got this great app idea, and I basically start to explain, this is how I think your app idea could be the most successful, and I explain the work that goes into it. And then they're like, you can see that kind of their eyes kind of like get defeated. They're like, oh, I thought I was just going to be able to tell someone my idea and like have someone shower me with money or whatever. And I'm like, it's never worked that way. Like, it's never worked that way. It's always about the grind.
Right. And that is so on point, because like Pravar was saying, like, you know, it's all based on the journey. There's a lot going on there before you actually get to that end result. So I wanted to ask you, while you were on your journey, did you have any sort of entrepreneur or any mentor that you looked up to while you were creating your business?
Well, my mom actually joined my company. So my mom I went to University of Michigan, got a degree in computer science, and my mom went to the University of Michigan and also got a degree in computer science. And so you guys are teenagers, and computer science is very common. When I was, you know, you must think I'm pretty old, but, you know, when I was in college, computer science was like a very well-established thing. But when my mom was in college, like that was in the 70s, like, you know, computers weren't even really a thing. There was no such thing as like a desktop computer. Computing was like, they existed, but they're like in warehouses. They were massive and required like big, like engineers to screw in parts and stuff to like do some like very simple computing. And so she was like one of the very first computer science graduates. But she, you know, she grew with the industry, and she was actually an entrepreneur in her own right, where she was the second employee at a company that grew to 70 employees and was acquired. And then, you know, she was my second employee, and she actually became like a part owner. And so she was, you know, again, privileged, like who has a mom who has a degree in computer science. But I do. And so, yeah, I was never really big, even with her, I was never really big into the mentor thing. Like I was her boss. She was like, you know, the vice president or whatever. But yeah, I never really formalized the mentor thing. Personally, I act as mentor to some other startups sometimes. And I think that they find value in it. Sometimes, you know, maybe, I don't know. But I personally didn't really ever seek out mentors. I don't know why. Maybe I should have. I might be, I don't know, might be more successful if I did.
Yeah, it definitely seems like you were really self-driven. You didn't, I mean, obviously, maybe you didn't know back then that a mentor could have helped a lot, but from what you did, from what you learned, you definitely became really successful as you ultimately sold your company for, I think, $5 million. So we kind of been talking about like the hardships of the company, but what was that turning point where you start to realize that this business is doing really well, and then up to the point right before you sell it, how were you kind of feeling? How were the emotions then too?
I mean, until there's actually a video I post on my Instagram where it's like a legit. I never thought I would post this publicly. I thought this was like for my eyes only. But like, I literally videotaped my bank account the day I clicked refresh and saw it go from like 100 grand, which was like my lifetime earnings, to like millions of dollars. And until that moment, I wasn't sure. Like, you know, in fact, like there's a period of what's called due diligence where the company that bought us basically sent us a Word document that said, we plan to buy your company for this amount of money. And it's called like a letter of intent or a term sheet or something. And, you know, it's just a Word document that's like a legal contract that says what they're planning to do. And then eventually there's another contract signed that's like the actual purchase agreement. It's another Word document. You know, I say this because I feel like the concept of acquiring a company is so abstract and people are like, what does that mean to acquire a company? But it's literally just Word documents. It's not even Google Docs. It's just Word documents that could just get emailed back and forth. And so there's like these series of these Word documents. And then at some point you sign them, and at some point money transfers, like they literally just wire money. You know, if you guys don't know what wiring is, it's just like, it's kind of like an electronic transfer, but it's usually you have to pay your bank like $20 to do one, but it's like instant. And so usually when you're talking about big dollar amounts, you go and like you wire the money instead of like writing a check or something. I don't know if you guys even know what checks are. It's like instead of Venmoing, it's like Venmoing except with millions of dollars. So wait, what was I talking about? The yeah, tell me the question again.
Yeah. So kind of the turning point where you realize that your business was, you know,
right,
going to be successful and all of that. I mean, which, you know,
yeah. So until that wire cleared, in that period of due diligence, I literally couldn't sleep. I was having trouble sleeping because I knew an exciting thing was in the process of happening. And I knew that there was potentially going to be millions of dollars coming to my bank account, but you know, deals fall through all the time. And until that money cleared, like I wasn't 100% sure it was gonna happen. You know, as we got closer, I was more and more sure. Yeah. So, and if that deal had fallen through, and that company found something they didn't like or got sidetracked or whatever, you know, I would have been back to like, you know, being a poor guy again, like, you know, driving my 99 Ford and like, you know, and the company was doing okay. Like we were doing about $1 million a year in revenue, but our expenses the year we sold, you know, broad strokes, we had like $25,000 in profit. So we like we earned $1 million, you know, we made $1 million and we spent 975,000, you know, that was largely by choice. Like I could have spent less. Most of that money I was spending was on engineers that I hired. There's 7 of us. You know, their salaries are like $100,000 each or more. And so I could have like fired one of them and just like kept their salary for myself or whatever. But I was purposely like aggressively growing the business. So yeah, but you know, I think there was uncertainty until the last day. But you know, over the 10 years that there was lots of, you know, there was like times where, you know, originally I would like send an invoice like in a letter, and like I'd send like one invoice every couple of weeks, and then you know there was a day where we sent like 30 invoices on one day. I was like, oh man, like we have like a lot of money coming in, and you know $1 million a year is like, what is that, $100,000 a month almost. So we're making like, you know, $80,000 or $90,000 a month. It's, you know, and as a guy that like had never seen any real amount of money before, like that was pretty crazy. Like we were spending it all too, so I wasn't like personally wealthy. But it was cool to like see this business like actually get some real traction compared to the early days where I was like, you know, if I saw $1,000, I was like super happy.